What a pleasure to introduce to you the great Lois Lowry of Maine and Massachusetts. Not only is Ms. Lowry from 2 states, she writes to 2 audiences, or 2 audience categories, young adult and teens. We are so appreciative that Ms. Lowry has agreed to make 2 presentations today to her 2 audiences. This is her second, to teens. I should say that she has 3 audiences. I count myself as one of the many adults who find her work so very appealing. And why wouldn't we? She describes her overriding theme as the importance of human connections. In describing her powerful, moving trilogy, which consists of the books The Giver, Gathering Blue, and Messenger, she elaborates on that theme, which she describes as the vital need of people to be aware of their interdependence, not only with each other, but with the world and its environment. She has written she's coming up on her 35th book, including a series that features the great Anastasia Krupnik, the series that features her brother, Sam, books about the Tates, the Goonie Bird books, the trilogy I just mentioned earlier, and 12 standalone titles. Amongst those standalone titles is Number the Stars, for which she received the Newbery Award. That's the highest honor my profession gives for Number of the Stars in 1990. And she actually, in practically unprecedented, she won the Newbery Award actually twice. And the second one was for The Giver, the part of that trilogy, in 1994. We are so happy and so privileged to welcome Lois Lowry.
That is very precarious. But in this weather, it's a good idea to have a bottle of water nearby. This is very informal. And so I talked this morning to a children's audience, although perhaps some of you are the same people who were there, about some of my books. And a lot of people wanted to ask questions about The Giver, and I said I'm saving that till the teen audience at 1:15. So that is part of what I'll talk about to this group in a very informal way. And I will hope that you'll have questions about either that or other of my books. So let me try to think where to start. Sheldon mentioned that I've written 34 books with number 35 and 36 soon to be published. And so I'm going to start by telling you about number 35, which is going to be frustrating because then you won't be able to go to the book tent and buy it because it won't be out till fall. But the book that's going to be published as number 35 is actually the book that got me started writing for children, and I want to explain what I mean by that. I began by writing for grown-ups. I grew up wanting to be a writer. I studied writing in college. I studied writing in graduate school. I studied photography in graduate school. And then I worked for magazines as a photojournalist. But I was also writing fiction because that was really my love. And in the 1970s, I could have papered a room of my house with rejection letters for fiction that I was writing, sending to magazines, short stories. And I would get nice letters back, but they all said basically, thank you, but we don't want to publish this. And in the midst of that period of time, on an early November morning, I lived in Maine. My kids, I had 4 kids, had all gone off to school. Their father, I had a husband then, this is now my ex-husband, had gone off to his law office. And so I was alone in the house with the Newfoundland dog who was out in the backyard. And I went to scrape the leftover scrambled eggs into the dog's bowl on the back porch. Now, if you have any brains at all, you're thinking, where is she going with this? How on earth does this relate to fiction? But as I mentioned, it was early November, and I lived in Maine, and I went out on the back porch to look for the dog and give him some leftover scrambled eggs. And suddenly my attention was caught by, my memory was caught by, the way the air smelled. This was Maine, early November, and there was wood smoke in the air from neighbors' wood stoves. There were apples still hanging on our apple trees, but now they were brown and wrinkled and had a certain smell. My kids' Halloween pumpkins were still on the porch and beginning to shrivel and smell that sweet, sour smell of rotten pumpkins. There were dead leaves on the ground, and all of that combined and triggered a memory of a day when I was 9 years old. And I went into the house to my typewriter, the same typewriter I had taken to college when I was 17, and by now in 1975 I was, I don't know, you'd have to do complicated math, but I was in my 30s. And I wrote down the memory that had come back to me. I wrote it as a story. It had a beginning, a middle, and end, and it was a day in my life in which I had changed. And that's the essence of any story or any novel. There is a protagonist, and you watch them encounter something, and you see them change. And that's what this day in my life was when I was 9 years old. And then I sent it to a magazine, and I got a letter back immediately saying they were going to publish it in their December issue. And in fact, my father's birthday, and my father was still alive then, was in November, and so I sent him $1 in a card, and I said, your birthday present will be at the drugstore when the December issue of Redbook comes out. Redbook magazine, which now only publishes articles about makeup and orgasms, at that time published fiction, and it published some good fiction. And so they were going to publish this story of mine, and it was about me and my father. And the first line of the story was, it was morning, early, barely light, cold for November. I was 9, and the war was over. In the car, I sat next to the stranger who was my father. And it was a story about a child seen through a child's eyes whose father has returned from the war. This is World War II, of course, me being the age I am, and who is encountering her father for the first time in a long time. My father was in the Pacific during World War II. He returned. He was a stranger to me. I wanted very much to love him. I think he felt the same way, but I didn't appreciate that at the time, but I was a stranger to him. He took me out, just he and I, for this one day, and that's when the story takes place. So that story was published in the 1975 or 76 December issue of Redbook magazine. And a children's book editor read it and got in touch with me and said, would you consider writing a book for young people? And that's when I wrote my first book for kids. But I said I wanted to talk about the book that is about to come out. That is the same story that begins, it was morning early, barely light, cold for November. I was 9 and the war was over. Because on hearing about this story and how I began to write for kids, quite recently, a book editor from Scholastic contacted me and said, could I read that story? I gave it to her, and she hired the most fabulous illustrator in the United States, I think, at the present time. He has illustrated the story, and it's going to come out as a beautiful picture book. The interesting thing is, it's called Crow Call. The interesting thing to me is that I hadn't realized this at the time, but it could be said in any time. A child's father returns from the war. For me, it was World War II. It could have been Korea, it could have been Vietnam, and sadly, it could be a story that happens today. With a father coming back after having been gone a long time and having perhaps participated in things that frighten the child. So that will be out in the fall. The title is Crow Call, and that will be my 35th book.